Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where the edge of the map meets the edge of reason. Tonight we slip into Alaska, a frozen land where even the daylight feels haunted and the aurora sways like restless spirits. Out here, the roads vanish, cabins rot under snow, and whispers crawl through the pines. These are real stories, drawn from the people who've lived here long enough to know what moves in the dark. Before we start, hit subscribe and tap the bell so the next time the cold calls, you're ready. The night's already settling in, and the first story waits like a shadow at the tree line. Step closer, but not too close. Story 1, Eternal Shift. The pickaxe sound started again at midnight, and this time they were coming from directly beneath my tent. My name is Jason Whitaker, and I spent 4 days camping near the abandoned Healy mining camp in the Alaska Range, trying to understand why men who died over a century ago refused to stop working. What I discovered was not just a ghost story. It was proof that some obligations run deeper than death, and that some places keep extracting what they are owed long after everyone has forgotten the debt. I am a documentary filmmaker specializing in abandoned industrial sites, and I had been planning this trip for months. The Healy mining camp operated from 1898 to 1937, employing over 200 men at its peak. It shut down when the easily accessible coal seams ran out and the company declared bankruptcy, leaving everything behind. Buildings, equipment, tunnels, all of it just abandoned in the wilderness like a monument to failed ambition. Local hikers had been reporting strange phenomena around the old camp for decades. The sound of pickaxes hitting rock echoing from the sealed mine entrances. Lantern lights moving through the tunnels visible through gaps in the collapsed timbers. The smell of coal dust and sweat in areas where no one had worked in over 80 years. I thought I would spend a few days documenting these claims, maybe capture some interesting audio, and put together a short film about how isolation and history create folklore. I was wrong about everything. The camp sits in a valley accessible only by a rough four-wheel drive trail that barely qualifies as a road. I hiked the last 3 miles, carrying my camera equipment and camping gear, reaching the site just before sunset on a cold October evening. The buildings were still standing, though barely. Wooden structures with collapsed roofs, rusted metal equipment scattered everywhere, and the dark mouths of mine entrances sealed with warnings about unstable ground and toxic gases. I set up my tent near what used to be the main office, a 2-story building with most of its windows broken and its walls leaning at angles that defied gravity. The plan was simple: spend 4 days and nights documenting the site, recording any unusual sounds, and interviewing any hikers who passed through. I had brought enough supplies to stay isolated for a week if necessary. The first night was quiet. I heard wind through the abandoned buildings, the creak of old wood settling, the distant sounds of the forest. Nothing unusual. I reviewed my footage from the day and went to sleep around 10, exhausted from the hike and confident that the next few days would be productive but uneventful. At midnight exactly, I woke to the sound of pickaxes. It was unmistakable, the rhythmic striking of metal against stone, echoing up from underground. Not one pickaxe but dozens of them, all working in a coordinated pattern that spoke of organized labor. I lay in my tent listening, my heart pounding, as the sounds continued for roughly 15 minutes before stopping as abruptly as they had started. I grabbed my audio recorder and spent the next 2 hours sitting outside my tent in the freezing darkness, waiting for the sounds to resume. They did not. The camp was silent except for the wind. But when I checked my recorder in the morning, I discovered something that made my skin crawl. The audio I had captured during the pickaxe sounds was not clean. Underneath the striking sounds, buried in the lower frequencies, there was something else. Voices. Men talking to each other. Their words too distorted to make out clearly, but the cadence and rhythm suggesting work songs or instructions being called out over the noise. I spent that day exploring the mine entrances, photographing warning signs and trying to peer into the darkness beyond the sealed openings. Most of the tunnels had collapsed decades ago, but a few remained partially open, and standing at those gaps, I could smell it. Coal dust and something organic, like sweat and unwashed bodies. The smell of men who had worked underground for hours without breaks, their clothes soaked through, their lungs slowly filling with dust. At one entrance, I found something that should not have been there. A lantern sitting just inside the sealed opening, positioned where I could see it clearly but could not reach it without removing the barrier boards. The lantern was old, probably from the early 1900s based on the design. And it was lit. The flame burned steadily inside the glass chimney, casting a small circle of warm light in the tunnel darkness. I stood there staring at it for 10 minutes, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Someone must have placed it there recently, maybe as a prank or as some kind of memorial to the dead miners. But the opening was sealed. The boards were weathered and had clearly been in place for years. No one had moved them. No one could have reached in to light that lantern without removing barriers that showed no signs of recent disturbance. I photographed it extensively and moved on, telling myself I would figure out a logical explanation later. But the image of that burning lantern stayed with me, and when night fell and I was back in my tent, I could not stop thinking about it. The pickaxe sounds started again at midnight. This time they were closer, not just under the camp, but under my specific location. I could feel vibrations through the ground, subtle but definite, as if people were working in a tunnel directly beneath where I lay. The rhythm was hypnotic. Strike, 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 pause, strike, 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 pause. Over and over with mechanical precision. I grabbed my flashlight and recorder and left the tent. The sounds were coming from everywhere and nowhere, impossible to pinpoint. I walked toward the main mine entrance, following what seemed to be the strongest source. And that was when I saw the lights. Lantern light, moving through the tunnels. I could see it through gaps in the collapsed sections, flickering yellow-orange glow moving deeper into the mountain. Not just one light, but many, spaced out as if carried by a line of workers heading to their shift. The lights moved with purpose, following paths that no longer existed in any maps I had seen. I called out. My voice echoed back from the mountain, but the lights did not stop. They kept moving, descending deeper, until they vanished around corners that had collapsed decades ago. And as they disappeared, the pickaxe sounds grew louder, more insistent, as if the arrival of the lights had signaled the start of more intensive work. I spent the next 2 hours recording everything, documenting the sounds and the patterns, trying to remain scientific and objective even as every instinct told me I was experiencing something that defied natural explanation. When the sounds finally stopped at 2:15 in the morning, the silence that followed was oppressive. It felt like the mountain itself was holding its breath. The next day, I drove back to the nearest town and spent hours in the local historical society, digging through records from the mining camp. I needed to understand what had happened there, why the sounds and lights persisted. The official history was straightforward. The mine operated for nearly 40 years, experienced the normal accidents and deaths that plagued such operations, and closed when it became unprofitable. Nothing in the records suggested anything unusual about the camp or its workers. But I found something else. A series of letters written by a mine supervisor in 1936, the year before the camp closed. He described problems with the workers. Not normal labor disputes, but something stranger. Employees refusing to leave at the end of their shifts. Men being found in the tunnels hours after they should have gone home, still working, seemingly unaware that their time was up. The supervisor attributed it to dedication or perhaps mental effects from the underground work, but his concern was evident in every letter. The final letter, dated 2 months before the camp closed, was different in tone. The supervisor wrote about losing men, not to accidents, but to the mountain itself. Workers would go into the tunnels and not come back out. Search parties would find no bodies, no signs of cave-ins, nothing to explain the disappearances. Just empty tunnels and the constant sound of pickaxes striking rock, coming from sections that had already been fully mined. The Historical Society director told me the camp had a reputation even when it was operating. Local indigenous people would not go near it, claiming the mountain was hungry and that the mining company had made a bargain they did not understand. She said 73 workers were officially listed as dead or missing by the time operations ceased, but the real number was probably much higher. Men who vanished and were never reported. Men whose families back in the lower 48 never knew what happened to them. I went back to the camp that night, armed with this new information and a growing sense that I had stumbled into something far darker than a simple haunting. The pickaxe sound started at midnight as expected, but this time I did something different. I approached the main mine entrance, got as close to the sealed opening as I dared, and I called out to whoever was working below. I told them the mine was closed, that the company was gone, that they could stop working and rest, that whatever contract they had signed, whatever debt they thought they owed, it had been paid 100 times over. My voice echoed into the mountain and was swallowed by the darkness. The pickaxe sound stopped. Complete silence. I stood there in the freezing night air, waiting, wondering if I had actually reached something that could hear and understand. Then, from deep underground, I heard footsteps. Many footsteps, coming closer. The lantern lights appeared in the tunnel beyond the sealed entrance. Dozens of them, moving toward me in a coordinated line. I could see figures carrying them now, shadows that were almost human but not quite right. They moved with the same mechanical precision as the pickaxe sounds, their gait steady and unchanging. They reached the sealed entrance and stopped. The lanterns illuminated faces that were little more than suggestions of features, worn away by time and darkness until only the essential shapes remained. They stared at me through the gaps in the boards, and I finally understood what I was seeing. These were not ghosts in the traditional sense. They were echoes of obligation. Men who had worked themselves to death for wages that never came, for promises that were never kept, for a company that had extracted everything they had and then abandoned them. They had died in these tunnels still believing they owed something, that they had to keep working to fulfill their contracts. And that belief had been strong enough to persist beyond death, beyond reason, trapping them in an eternal shift they could never complete. One figure reached toward the boards, its hand passing through the wood like smoke. It pointed at me, then down at the ground where I stood, then at the tunnels behind it. The meaning was clear. The mountain always needs workers. The mountain always has room for more. And anyone who camps here, anyone who shows interest in the work, anyone who calls out to the miners, makes themselves part of the contract. I ran. I abandoned my tent, my equipment, everything except my camera and recorder, and I ran down that mountain trail in the darkness. Behind me, I could hear the pickaxe sounds growing louder, not coming from underground anymore, but following me, keeping pace no matter how fast I moved. The lantern lights appeared in the forest around me, moving parallel to the trail, herding me, ensuring I could not leave the path. I made it to my truck as the sun was rising. The sound stopped as soon as I started the engine, and the lights vanished like they had never been there. I drove away from that place, and I have not been back. But here's what terrifies me. Here's why I am telling this story now. Last night, I heard pickaxe sounds in my apartment. Faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere below my building. And this morning, I found coal dust on my floor. Just a small pile of it, sitting by my front door, as if someone had walked in after a long shift and tracked it inside. I think the mountain is not done with me. I think by calling out to those workers, by acknowledging them and trying to release them, I made myself visible to whatever keeps them bound. And now it wants to add me to its crew. Another worker for the eternal shift. Another soul to extract until there is nothing left but the obligation to keep working. So here's my question for you. If you stumbled on something that should have been left alone, something that trapped people in endless cycles of labor and suffering, would you try to help? Or would you walk away and hope it never noticed you? Because I tried to help. And now I cannot escape the sound of pickaxes in the dark, getting closer every night, promising me a job that will never end. Story 2. Last log. What killed the USS Grunion? I'm holding the logbook right now. The actual logbook, not a photocopy or a digital scan. The original leather-bound journal recovered from the Bering Sea in 2007, still bearing the salt stains and water damage from 63 years beneath the ocean. And I need to tell you what is written in these pages before what happened to that submarine happens to someone else. Before that thing comes back. Before it realizes they've found its record. My name is Thomas Brennan. I am a naval historian and archival specialist employed by the Navy Department. 3 years ago, I was brought into a classified project to examine and authenticate what appeared to be the final logbook of the USS Grunion, a submarine that vanished during the Second World War with all 56 crew members aboard. The Grunion was a Gatto-class submarine, state-of-the-art for 1942. It was commissioned in March of that year and immediately deployed to the Pacific Theater. The captain was Lieutenant Commander Masao Yamada, an experienced and respected officer. The submarine was on its way back from combat operations in the Aleutian Islands when all communication ceased. For 63 years, the Grunion and its crew were simply gone. Lost, presumed destroyed in enemy action. Until July of 2007 when a fishing vessel near the Bering Sea dredged up something impossible. The logbook was recovered from the ocean floor in a waterproof canvas satchel, perfectly preserved despite more than 6 decades submerged. The Navy recovered it, authenticated it, and then sealed it away. The official story released to the public was that the submarine had been found on the ocean bottom through sonar mapping. That was a lie. The only thing that was ever recovered was this book. This single, haunting record of what actually happened to the Grunion and its crew. I was brought into the project because I had security clearance and a reputation for discretion. I was told to examine the logbook, authenticate it as genuine, and provide my assessment. I was told to keep absolutely silent about everything I found, and I was given a terrifying warning. I was told that if I published or shared anything from the logbook, I would face federal prosecution. I was told this project was classified at the highest levels. I was told to understand that some things are kept secret for good reasons. I wish I had listened to that warning. The logbook entries begin normally. Standard naval documentation, course headings, weather observations, mechanical updates, crew morale assessments. Captain Yamada, his handwriting was precise and professional. The entries show a submarine performing routine combat operations in the Aleutian chain. Nothing unusual, nothing to suggest that anything catastrophic was about to occur. But then the tone changes. About 40 pages in, the entries become less formal, more anxious, more disturbed. On August 10, 1942, Captain Yamada wrote about an unusual sonar contact. Something large and unidentifiable moving beneath the submarine at considerable depth. The sonar operator couldn't categorize it. It wasn't will. The movement pattern was too deliberate, too intelligent. The size estimates were inconsistent, ranging from 80 feet to over 200 feet long. The contact moved like nothing the operator had ever encountered before. Captain Yamada ordered the submarine to investigate. They descended to deeper depths, trying to make visual contact with whatever was below them. And that is when the terrifying entries begin. The logbook describes bioluminescence, an eerie, pulsing blue-green light illuminating the water around the submarine. The light wasn't constant. It flickered and pulsed in patterns that suggested communication. The crew reported seeing shadows moving within the illuminated water. Enormous shadows, shapes that didn't match any known species of marine life. Captain Yamada theorized it was a Japanese vessel using some kind of experimental lighting technology. He ordered the crew to battle stations. He prepared the submarine, its torpedoes for firing. But as they moved to engage, the thing in the water moved faster. It matched their every maneuver. It seemed to understand submarine tactics. It seemed to know exactly where the Grunion would go before they went there. The first attack came at night. The logbook describes an impact against the hull. Not from a torpedo, from something physical, something hard and massive ramming the submarine from below with enough force to shake the entire vessel. The crew reported sounds like nothing they'd ever heard before. Sounds like singing, but horrible and alien and deeply unsettling. Sounds like whales, but with inflections that suggested something far more intelligent. Over the following days, the entries grew increasingly panicked. The bioluminescent thing was following them. Every time they tried to escape, it caught them. Every time they dug deeper, it dove with them. Every time they changed course, it anticipated their movement. The creature seemed to be herding them, driving them toward a specific location in the Bering Sea. The crew was terrified. Men reported hearing strange sounds from outside the hull when they tried to sleep. The sonar operators heard clicking and chirping noises that made no sense. The engineers reported vibrations that shouldn't have existed given the submarine's mechanical status. The fear was spreading through the crew like a disease. Men were losing their sanity from the stress and the isolation and the feeling of being hunted by something massive and intelligent from the depths. Then Captain Yamada made a decision that sealed the fate of everyone aboard. He decided to attack. The logbook describes the preparation. The crew loaded all 8 forward torpedoes. Captain Yamada calculated the trajectory based on the sonar data. He gave the order to fire. 8 torpedoes launched directly at the bioluminescent creature moving beneath them. For a moment, there was hope. The entries describe the crew believing they finally defeated the thing. But then something happened that shouldn't have been possible. The bioluminescence intensified, not in panic or in response to damage, in what the logbook describes as deliberate, calculated intensification. The creature rose up. The entries become almost incoherent at this point, but I can piece together what happened. The submarine's hull couldn't withstand the pressure from something that large rising directly beneath it. The Grunion was lifted, actually lifted out of its normal depth and flipped. The crew was thrown violently. Equipment was destroyed. The submarine's structural integrity failed. Water began flooding the compartments. Captain Yamada managed to write one final entry before the end. His handwriting was shaking. The words were rushed and desperate. He described the thing as they finally saw it clearly. He wrote that it was indescribable. He wrote that no creature should be that large. He wrote that it had eyes, multiple eyes, and the eyes seemed to be looking at him, at the submarine, at the fragile human vessel that had dared to attack it. His final words were, they'd done something terrible. They'd made it angry. God forgive us, they made it so very angry. The light is everywhere now. The singing is everywhere. I can feel it in my mind. I can feel it in. The logbook entry ends mid-sentence. 56 men died aboard the USS Grunion that day. All crew members perished in the sinking submarine. Their bodies were never recovered. They remained on the ocean floor for 63 years until that fishing vessel found the logbook wedged in the submarine, its debris field. For decades, the official explanation was that the Grunion had been sunk by Japanese forces. No one knew the truth. No one knew that the submarine had been destroyed by something that shouldn't exist. Something that the Navy had successfully kept secret for more than 6 decades. But I made a terrible mistake. After I completed my authentication of the logbook, I became obsessed with what really happened to the Grunion. I spent nights researching, trying to find any historical evidence that might support the creature's existence. I found accounts from other World War II naval vessels reporting similar phenomena. A destroyer escort reported bioluminescent waters in the Bering Sea. A cargo ship described enormous shadows and strange singing sounds. A fishing vessel from the 1970s mentioned an eerie blue-green light in the water that drove the crew to panic. None of these accounts were connected officially. No one had put the pieces together. But I did. I realized that the creature Captain Yamada described was still out there. It was still in the Bering Sea. It had been sighted multiple times over the decades, and each time it was sighted, the reports were classified and buried. I also realized something far more disturbing. The creature seemed to be waking up. The sightings were becoming more frequent. The most recent report I found, dated just 4 years ago, described a fishing vessel encountering the bioluminescence. The crew reported that the light seemed to be searching for something, moving in deliberate patterns, almost like it was looking for answers, almost like it was looking for whoever had tried to kill it 70 years ago. That's when I began to notice something wrong with my own behavior. I'd start the day and lose hours without knowing where the time had gone. I'd find myself standing on my balcony at 3 in the morning, staring toward the west, toward the ocean, toward the Bering Sea. I'd hear sounds that shouldn't be there. Sounds like singing, sounds like whales, sounds like something calling to me across vast distances. I realize now what happened. By studying the logbook so intensely, by reading Captain Yamada's final words over and over, by immersing myself in his experience of the creature, I connected myself to it somehow. The thing in the Bering Sea became aware of me. It recognized me as someone who carried knowledge of its existence. It recognized me as a potential threat or a potential asset. I tried to stop studying the logbook. I requested reassignment. I told my supervisors I was experiencing psychological difficulties, but my request was denied. I was told to continue my work. I was told the logbook needed to be kept secure and cataloged. I was told I was the only person with the clearance and expertise to complete the project. I was trapped, and the creature knew it. The nightmares started. In these dreams, I am submerged in dark water. The bioluminescence surrounds me. The singing grows louder, and I can see something massive moving in the distance. Something with eyes that are looking directly at me. Eyes filled with an intelligence that is utterly inhuman and utterly hostile. Eyes that are trying to communicate something across the gulf of species difference. The creature is showing me something in these dreams. It is showing me memories. Memories of something vast and conscious existing in Earth's oceans for thousands of years. Memories of humans hunting it, trying to kill it, using weapons it doesn't understand. The creature has memory. The creature has purpose. The creature has hunger. And it is angry that we tried to destroy it. I believe the USS Grunion wasn't the only attack. I believe there have been others. I believe the creature has been hunted countless times throughout history, and each hunting only makes it more aggressive, more determined to destroy anything that comes too close. And I believe it is preparing to come out of the deep. The creature is waking. The bioluminescence is appearing more frequently in the Bering Sea. Fishing vessels are reporting the strange lights and sounds with increasing frequency. The Navy is capturing these reports and classifying them, trying to maintain the secret, trying to pretend the creature doesn't exist. But the creature exists, and it remembers what we did to it. It remembers the USS Grunion and the torpedoes and Captain Yamada trying to kill it. And I think it is looking for revenge. I think it is looking for the people responsible. And since Captain Yamada and his crew are long dead, I think it is settling for the next best thing. It is looking for me. Because I know the truth. Because I carry the knowledge. Because the closest living representative of the species that tried to destroy it. The dreams are getting worse. The nightmares are becoming more vivid. I can see the creature more clearly now. I can see its true form. It's not a whale. It's not a fish. It's something else entirely. Something that evolved in the depths where no human light has ever reached. Something that was already ancient and intelligent when our species was first learning to make tools. I am telling this story because I need someone to know what really happened to the USS Grunion. I need someone to understand that the ocean contains things we don't understand. Things that are far older than us. Things that are far more powerful than us. I need someone to know that there's a creature in the Bering Sea that is conscious and aware and possibly hunting my species. But mostly, I'm telling this story because I think the creature has been listening. I think it knows I'm telling you about it. And I think that by sharing this account, by naming what it is and what it did, I am inviting it to come closer. I am inviting it to emerge from the deep. I am inviting it to finally finish what it started 70 years ago. The bioluminescence was visible off the coast last week. A fishing vessel reported it. The Navy classified the report within hours. But I know what it means. The creature is moving closer to the surface. The creature is preparing for something. And I think my time is running out. I can feel it in the water. I can hear it in my dreams. The singing is getting louder. The eyes are getting closer. The intelligence behind those eyes is reaching out across the gulf of species difference, trying to establish contact, trying to communicate something essential that my human mind might not survive understanding. I am asking you this. If you knew that something vast and intelligent and hostile lived in the depths of the ocean, if you knew that it had been there for thousands of years, if you knew that it was waking up and preparing to make contact with humanity, would you tell anyone? Would you share the secret? Or would you stay silent and let the creature remain a myth, a legend, a story that nobody takes seriously? Tell me in the comments. Tell me what you would do. Tell me if you think the creature is real or if you think I am insane. And tell me, if you ever see a strange bioluminescence in the ocean, would you approach it or would you run? Story 3. Juneau photograph. Have you ever looked at an old photograph and felt like you were actually there, standing in that moment, breathing that air? I am about to tell you what happened when I visited Juneau, Alaska last February. And I need you to understand something before I start. I am not crazy. I am a high school history teacher from Portland, Oregon. I am married. I have 2 teenage daughters. I coach junior varsity basketball. I am as normal as they come. But what happened to me in Juneau changed everything I thought I knew about reality. It started when my wife Karen surprised me with a cruise to Alaska for my 48th birthday. She knew I always wanted to see the glaciers. And after 20 years of marriage, she finally saved enough for the trip. We flew into Juneau on a Friday afternoon in mid-February. The town was buried under 3 feet of fresh snow, the kind of heavy, wet snow that muffles every sound and makes the world feel wrapped in cotton. Our cruise didn't leave until Sunday, so we had a full day to explore the city. Karen wanted to do the typical tourist things. Gift shops, the state museum, maybe a whale watching tour if the weather cleared. But I was drawn to the older part of downtown, the historic district where buildings from the gold rush era still stood along narrow streets that climbed the hillside. There was something about those old structures that pulled at me. As a history teacher, I always felt connected to the past, like I could almost touch it if I tried hard enough. Karen thought it was boring, my obsession with old buildings and antique photographs. But standing there on those snow-covered streets, looking at structures that had witnessed over a century of history, I felt more alive than I had in years. We split up around 2 in the afternoon. Karen went back to the hotel to rest, and I continued wandering the historic district with my camera. The snow was falling harder now, fat flakes that stuck to my jacket and turned the world into a blur of white and gray. Most of the tourists had gone inside, and I found myself alone on a steep street called Franklin, walking past closed storefronts and empty restaurants. That's when I saw the building. It stood at the corner of Franklin and 4th, a 3-story structure with ornate woodwork and tall, narrow windows. The architecture was distinctly from the 1920s, all sharp angles and geometric patterns. A faded sign above the door read Merchant, his hotel, though it was clear the place had been abandoned for decades. The windows were dark, some broken, and snow had drifted against the entrance. Something about that building called to me. I can't explain it better than that. It was like a frequency only I could hear, a pull in my chest that made me walk closer despite the voice in my head telling me to turn around and head back to the warm hotel room where Karen was probably already asleep. I stood in front of the merchant's hotel and raised my camera. Through the viewfinder, I could see details I hadn't noticed before. The way the snow had settled in the carved recesses of the woodwork. The ice crystals forming patterns on the remaining glass. I took 3 photos, each from a slightly different angle, trying to capture the melancholy beauty of this forgotten place. When I lowered the camera, everything had changed. The snow was still falling, but the quality of light was different. Warmer, more golden, like late afternoon sunlight filtering through clouds. The street around me was no longer empty. There were people everywhere, dozens of them, all dressed in clothing from another era. Women in long coats and cloche hats, men in 3-piece suits and fedoras, children in knickers and wool caps, throwing snowballs and laughing. And the cars, my God, the cars. Model T Fords and vintage touring cars, all black or dark green, their engines puffing and smoking as they navigated the snowy street. The sound was overwhelming after the silence I had been walking through. Voices calling to each other, the clang of a streetcar bell, the crunch of boots on packed snow, music drifting from somewhere, a jazz tune played on a scratchy gramophone. I stood frozen, my camera still raised, trying to process what I was seeing. The merchant's hotel was different too. The windows were lit from inside, golden light spilling onto the snow. The sign above the door was bright and new, freshly painted. Through the windows I could see people moving around inside, sitting at tables, drinking from delicate teacups. No one seemed to notice me. People walked past within inches, their breath creating small clouds in the cold air, but their eyes slid over me like I wasn't there. I looked down at myself and saw that my modern winter jacket, my jeans, my hiking boots, they all looked wrong here. Out of place, like special effects that hadn't been properly rendered into the scene. I took a step forward and felt resistance, like walking through water. The air itself seemed thicker, pushing back against my movement. A woman walked past me, so close I could smell her perfume, something floral and old-fashioned. She carried packages wrapped in brown paper and string. Her face was focused, intent on getting home before the snow got worse. She had no idea I was there. I raised my camera again, some instinct telling me to document what I was seeing. Through the viewfinder, everything looked even more real, more solid. I could see the individual snowflakes, the texture of the wool coats, the grain in the wooden sidewalk beneath my feet. I pressed the shutter button. The camera made its normal clicking sound, and the world lurched. Suddenly I was standing in the middle of the street, and a car was coming right at me. Not a Model T anymore, but a modern SUV, its horn blaring. I jumped back and slipped on the ice, falling hard on my hip. The SUV swerved around me and kept going, the driver shouting something I couldn't hear through the closed windows. I lay there in the snow, my heart hammering, looking around at a street that was once again empty and quiet. The people were gone. The vintage cars were gone. The merchant's hotel stood dark and abandoned exactly as it had been before. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the soft whisper of falling snow. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my hip, and checked my camera. The digital display showed the last photo I'd taken, but it wasn't the picture of an abandoned building. It was a clear, sharp image of Franklin Street in the 1920s. People in period clothing, vintage cars, the hotel lit up and bustling with activity. Every detail was perfect, impossibly perfect, like a professional photograph from a historical archive. I took 3 more pictures of the building, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the camera steady. Each photo showed the same thing, the abandoned present-day structure. Nothing unusual, nothing impossible, just an old building slowly being reclaimed by weather and time. But that one photograph, that single image I captured during whatever had just happened, it showed a different reality, a different time, and I had proof it had been real. I ran back to the hotel, slipping and sliding on the icy sidewalks, my mind racing. Karen was awake, watching television. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. I tried to explain what had happened, showing her the photograph on my camera, this display. She stared at it for a long time without saying anything. Finally, she looked up at me with concern in her eyes. Not fear or disbelief, just worry. She thought I was having some kind of episode. Too much stress at work, maybe a small stroke, the altitude affecting me even though Juneau was barely above sea level. She wanted to call a doctor. I convinced her I was fine, just shaken up from slipping on the ice and hitting my head. It was easier than trying to make her understand something I didn't to understand myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark hotel room, listening to Karen, just steady breathing beside me, and stared at that photograph on my camera until my eyes burned. I zoomed in on details, examining faces, looking for anything that might explain what I experienced. And that's when I noticed something that made my blood turn cold. In the background of the photo, standing in the window of the Merchant, this hotel on the second floor, there was a figure. A man in modern clothing. He was pressed against the glass, his hands on either side of his face, his mouth open like he was shouting. And he was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. I zoomed in further, enhancing the image as much as the camera would allow. The man, his face was twisted in absolute terror. And there was something else, something written on the window glass beside him. Letters scratched or drawn in the condensation. I could only make out part of the message. Help trapped, since the rest was obscured by the angle and the glare from the interior lights. But those 3 words were clear enough. Someone else had been where I was. Someone else had slipped into that moment in the past, and they hadn't made it back. I spent the rest of the night researching on my phone, searching for any information about the Merchant, this hotel, about disappearances in Juneau, about anything that might explain what I'd seen. What I found made my hands start shaking again. In February of 1928, exactly 97 years before my visit, a massive snowstorm had hit Juneau. The city had been paralyzed for 3 days, and when the snow finally stopped, several people were reported missing. Among them was a traveling salesman named Robert Delaney who had been staying at the Merchant, his hotel. His room had been found unlocked and empty, his belongings still there, but no sign of the man himself. He was never found. The historical record showed a photograph of Delaney, a formal portrait from the mid-20s, the kind people had taken at professional studios. He was a nondescript man, average in every way, with short dark hair and a thin mustache. But his eyes, I recognized something in his eyes, a kind of desperate awareness, like he knew something terrible was coming and couldn't stop it. Over the next few hours, I found 3 more cases. A woman named Catherine Morris who vanished from her room at the Merchant, this hotel, in February of 1932. A young couple, William and Martha Reed, who disappeared from the hotel lobby in February of 1936. All of them had been there during heavy snowstorms. All of them had simply vanished, leaving behind their belongings and no explanation. And then I found something that made me physically sick. A blog post from 2012, written by a man named David Chen from San Francisco. He described visiting Juneau in February and experiencing exactly what I had experienced. The shift in time, the 1920s coming alive around him, the feeling of being invisible to the people from the past. He'd even taken a photograph that showed the same thing mine did. But here is what made me want to throw my phone across the room. The blog post ended abruptly mid-sentence, and when I searched for more information about David Chen, I found a missing person report filed by his wife in February of 2012. He disappeared during a trip to Juneau. Security footage from his hotel showed him leaving his room and never returning. He simply vanished. I checked the date of his disappearance. February 14th, 2012. Exactly 13 years before my visit. And exactly 84 years after Robert Delaney had vanished from the Merchant, this hotel. I realized with growing horror that whatever was happening in Juneau, it operated on a cycle. Every few years, during heavy snowstorms in February, something opened up. A crack in time, a doorway to the past. Do you know what to call it? And people who got too close, who took photographs at exactly the wrong moment, they slipped through. And most of them didn't come back. The question that kept me awake, the thought that made my skin crawl, was simple. How many people were trapped in that moment in 1928? How many tourists and travelers and curious locals had stumbled into that snowy February day and found themselves unable to return? Were they all there together, invisible to each other, each one alone in a crowded street that existed 97 years in the past? Was that man in the window of the Merchant, this hotel, someone who had been trapped for days, months, years? Was he still there now, pressed against that glass, screaming for help that would never come? I deleted the photograph. I know I shouldn't have. I know it was evidence of something impossible and potentially important. But I couldn't stand looking at it anymore. That terrified face in the window, Those 3 words scratched in the condensation. I deleted it and then emptied the trash folder on my camera, making sure it was truly gone. Karen and I left Juneau the next day on the cruise ship. I never told her the full truth about what I found, about the missing people and the pattern of disappearances. She was already worried enough about me. The cruise was wonderful, or it should have been. We saw glaciers and whales, ate expensive dinners, attended comedy shows in the ship's theater. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something terrible. That if I stood in front of that building for just a few seconds longer, or taken one more photograph, I might not have made it back. We've been home in Portland for 8 months now. Life has returned to normal. I teach my classes, coach basketball, help my daughters with their homework. But I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, my heart racing, absolutely certain that I'm still standing on Franklin Street in the snow, watching people from another time walk past me without seeing me. That everything since that moment, my return to the hotel, the cruise, the flight home, my life for the past 8 months, all of it has been a dream. A comforting hallucination created by a mind that has been trapped in the past for almost a year. How would I know if it wasn't real? How would I know if I actually made it back? I started taking photographs of everything. My classroom, my house, my family. I checked the dates on the images obsessively, making sure they match the calendar, making sure time is actually moving forward. Karen has noticed. She thinks I'm developing some kind of anxiety disorder. She might be right. But I need to know that this is real, that I'm actually here in my own time, living my own life. Last week, I found another blog post. This one was written by a woman named Sarah Martinez from Chicago. She visited Juneau in February of 2024 and had experienced the same time slip I had. But unlike me, she stayed in that past moment for what she described as several hours. She walked the streets of 1928 Juneau, invisible to everyone, unable to interact with anything, slowly realizing that she might be stuck there forever. But she made it back. She wrote that she returned to the exact spot where the shift had happened, stood in the same place, and waited. And eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the present had come crashing back around her. She escaped. Her blog post ended with a warning. She said that she could feel it calling to her, even now, months later. The pull to go back to Juneau, to stand in front of that building again, to slip into that snowy February day in 1928 and stay there. She said it was like an addiction, a hunger she couldn't satisfy. She was planning to return to Juneau next February, despite knowing how dangerous it was. Despite knowing she might not make it back a second time. That was 3 weeks ago. I've been checking her blog every day since then. She hasn't posted anything new. Her last entry is still that warning, that confession of her obsession. And I can stop thinking about her because I understand exactly what she meant. About the pull, about the hunger. Because here, this is what I haven't told anyone. Not Karen, not my daughters, not the therapist I started seeing in May. I can feel it too. That call to return to Juneau, to stand in front of the Merchant's Hotel during a February snowstorm and let it take me. Part of me wants to go back, needs to go back, like there. Something unfinished there, something waiting for me in that moment frozen in time. I dream about it almost every night now. I'm standing on Franklin Street, and the snow is falling, and the world is shifting around me into those golden tones of the past. But in my dreams, I dawn to take a photograph. I dawn to document what I had seen. I just start walking down the street, into the crowd, becoming part of that day in 1928. And in my dreams, it feels like relief, like finally coming home after being lost for a very long time. I looked up flights to Juneau yesterday. February 14th is a Saturday next year. I could tell Karen it's a quick research trip for my classes, that I want to gather more historical information about Alaska. She believed me. She always believes me, and maybe I could find answers. Maybe I could figure out what is actually happening at that building. Why time fractures there during snowstorms? How many people are trapped in that single day almost a century in the past? Maybe I could even help them somehow. Find a way to bring them back, or at least let their families know what happened to them. Or maybe I'm just trying to justify an obsession I don't fully understand. Maybe the truth is simpler and more terrifying. Maybe that moment in the past is where I'm supposed to be. Maybe I was always meant to slip through that crack in time and never return. Maybe that This is my real life waiting for me, and everything here is just a temporary stop before I go back to where I belong. So here is what I need you to tell me, and I want you to really think about this before you answer in the comments. If you had experienced what I did, if you had evidence that you slipped into another time and barely made it back, would you return? Would you risk everything to understand what happened? Or would you stay safe in your normal life and try to forget, even though you'll never really forget that you'll dream about it every night for the rest of your life? Because I honestly, Don, you know what I'm going to do. And I think that is what scares me most of all. Story 4, Black Shape on the Dalton Highway. They've been driving the Dalton Highway for 17 years, and they never told anyone what I saw that night in January. Not my wife, not my therapist, not a single soul. But I'm telling you now because I need someone to know before it happens to someone else. Before it happens to you. The Dalton Highway stretches 414 miles through Alaska's interior, from Fairbanks north to Prudhoe Bay. It's one of the most isolated, terrifying stretches of road in North America. Most people don't understand what that means. They think isolation is just quiet. It's not. Isolation is knowing that if something goes wrong, if your truck breaks down, if you have a heart attack, nobody will find you. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe never. The darkness up there, I ascend, just the absence of light. It is a presence. It's alive. It watches. I was running diesel north on a Tuesday night in the dead of winter. Temperature sat at minus 35 degrees, the kind of cold that makes metal brittle and turns exposed skin to glass in minutes. My truck was a Peterbilt, hauling supplies to the oil fields. The road was empty, completely empty. I passed another vehicle around 6 that evening, and since then, nothing but white headlights cutting through an endless black horizon. Around midnight, I noticed something unsettling about the darkness ahead. It wasn't the normal black of an Alaskan winter night. There was something different, something wrong. I'd driven this route hundreds of times, and I knew how the darkness usually looked, how it felt. This was different. It was thicker, denser, like the air itself had turned solid. I remember my hands tightening on the wheel. My dash cam was running, like it always was. That detail matters. That detail is everything. The first time I saw the figure, my entire body went rigid. My foot actually eased off the accelerator without me thinking about it. Straight ahead, about 300 yards in front of me, illuminated perfectly by my headlights, was a shape. A human shape, completely black. Not the black of dark clothing, but an absolute, consuming black. The kind of black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was standing dead center in my lane. I'd seen drifters on the Dalton before. I'd seen hitchhikers, stranded drivers, even someone who abandoned a broken-down truck miles from anywhere. But this was different. This was terrifying in a way I couldn't quite process. The figure wasn't moving. It was just standing there, watching my truck approach. My instinct was to swerve, but something stopped me. Some strange awareness that this thing, whatever it was, wanted me to react, wanted me to panic. So I didn't. I maintained my speed, kept the truck steady, and told myself it was probably just someone in a dark coat, someone needing help. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. I was going to hit it. That's what my brain was telling me. At 80 kilometers per hour, I was going to collide with this black shape standing in the middle of the road. I didn't brake. I don't. Do you know why? I just kept driving straight toward it. When my truck was about 50 yards away, the figure moved. Not walked, moved. It simply ceased to exist in one location and appeared in another, off to the shoulder of the road, still perfectly visible in my headlights. The movement was impossible. No human could move that fast. No human should move like that. My mouth went completely dry. My skin crawled with a sensation like spiders running across my entire body. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the road ahead, but in my peripheral vision, I could feel it. I could feel those absence of eyes watching my truck pass. Watching me specifically. That's the part that has always stayed with me. The certain knowledge that it was watching me, studying me. After I passed, I checked my mirrors. It was still there, standing on the shoulder, and then it wasn't. It was just gone, vanished into the darkness like it had never existed at all. I pulled over about a mile down the road with shaking hands. My entire body was soaked in sweat despite the brutal cold that was trying to kill anything foolish enough to stop on this highway. My first instinct was to check the dash cam. This was real. I had proof. I pulled up the footage with trembling fingers. The video showed nothing. It showed everything else perfectly. The road, the guide markers, the snow swirling in my headlights. But where that black shape should have been, where it had stood so vividly, so impossibly in front of me, the camera showed only empty road. Blank darkness. Nothing. This is the creepy part. This is the truly unsettling detail that keeps me awake at night. The dashcam recorded everything except the thing that terrified me most. I drove the remaining 40 miles to Prudhoe Bay in a state of controlled panic. My rational mind kept trying to explain it, a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation, a trick of light and shadow. My brain was firing after too many hours staring at the same empty road. The human mind is incredible at rationalizing fear, at explaining away the inexplicable. But deep down, in that ancient part of my brain that remembers when humans weren't the dominant species, I knew what I'd seen was real. I didn't to file a report. What was I going to say? That something invisible to cameras stood in the road? That something impossible had stood 20 feet from me? They pulled my license. They questioned my sobriety. My career would be over. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. On my next run south, I was hyper-vigilant, staring into every shadow, expecting that black shape to appear again. It didn't. The drive was perfectly normal, perfectly boring, which somehow felt worse. At least if it had happened again, I could confirm I wasn't losing my mind. Then I started researching, late nights on internet forums, trucker websites, urban legend databases, and I found them, other drivers, dozens of them, some going back 15, 20 years, all describing the same phenomenon, the black shape on the Dalton Highway, a figure standing in the road, completely visible to the eye but invisible to every camera that tried to record it. Invisible to dash cams, to phones, to professional equipment. It appeared and disappeared without warning. It moved in ways that defied the laws of physics. Most of the drivers who'd seen it went back to their routes nervously but uneventfully. They saw it once and then never again. They tried to convince themselves it was some shared delusion, some group hysteria among sleep-deprived truckers. But there were others. 3 of them, according to the forums, had gone missing after seeing the black shape. Their trucks were found abandoned on the Dalton Highway with no signs of struggle, no explanation. One of them, a driver named Marcus Webb, left a final message on a trucker.'s forum the night before his truck was discovered. He'd written, "It is getting closer. Every time I pass, it's a little closer to my cab. Tonight I think it might actually touch the truck." That was in 2009. Marcus Webb was never found. I've run the Dalton 73 times since that first encounter. I've seen the black shape exactly 4 more times. And each time, it's been different. The second sighting was 4 months later. Same appearance, same impossible black, same sensation of being observed. But this time, it was standing on the shoulder, and as I passed, it turned its featureless head to follow my truck. Not moved, not looked, turned. A deliberate, mechanical rotation of a shape that shouldn't exist. That had no joints, no visible means of movement. I understood, with terrible certainty, that it was tracking me specifically. The third time was 11 months after that. I was so terrified I almost ran off the road. The figure was standing much closer to the highway's edge, and as I approached at high speed, it stepped forward. Not walked, stepped. One movement, and it was 3 feet closer than before. I accelerated to over 100 miles per hour on a treacherous ice highway. When I looked back, it was gone. The fourth encounter happened only 2 weeks ago. This time, it wasn't standing on the road or shoulder. It was on top of my truck. I didn't see it appear. I was driving normally, radio off, just me and the sound of my engine and the wind howling across the frozen wasteland. When I heard it, a soft scratching sound on the metal above my cab. A rhythmic, patient scratching, like something with claws learning the dimensions of my roof. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely keep the truck on the road. The scratching continued, methodical, purposeful, searching. I didn't check the mirrors. I didn't pull over. I just drove, and after what felt like an eternity, after maybe 20 minutes of that sound slowly moving across the metal above me, it stopped. When I finally gathered the courage to check, There was nothing there. No footprints, no marks, nothing but fresh snow and empty darkness. I know what is happening. They read the forums. They looked at the patterns. The black shape is getting braver. It is testing us. It's learning. And I think I know what it wants. It wants to know if it can touch us, if it can get inside, if it can become part of our world instead of existing at the edge of it. Marcus Webb knew this. That is what his final message meant. It was getting closer because it was learning how. I've been changing my routes, trying to avoid the Dalton Highway. But there are only so many roads that go north in Alaska, and the oil companies need supplies. Every driver knows that eventually, you'll run out of alternate routes. Eventually, you'll have to go back to the Dalton. Back to where it waits. I am telling you this because I need someone else to know. I need someone else to understand that there are things on this earth that exist in the spaces between what we can see and what we can prove. Things that are aware of us. Things that are learning from us. Things that are getting closer. The Dalton Highway is almost 400 miles of isolation. It is almost 400 miles where nothing can reach you, and you can't reach anything. It is almost 400 miles where, if something wanted to learn everything about how to slip into our world, how to cross from the darkness into the light, it would have an endless supply of vehicles to study. Here is what I need you to understand. The black shape ISN, trying to hurt the drivers who see it. Or maybe it is, but more than that, I think it is asking a question. It is asking if it can exist where we exist, if it can become real in a world where cameras and logic and science govern everything. And every time one of us sees it and lives, every time we survive the encounter and drive away, we reteaching it something. We reproving that it is possible. They've been driving north for 17 years, and they learned something terrifying. Something that keeps me awake at night, even when I'm not behind the wheel. The black shape ISN getting closer because it is hunting us. It is getting closer because it's becoming real. It is crossing over. And the next time I see it, the next time it stands in my headlights on that endless ice road stretching through the frozen darkness, I don't think it is going to step aside. I don't think my dash cam is going to be the only thing that doesn't record it anymore. So here, it's my question for you. If you were driving alone on a desolate highway in the middle of the night, and something impossible appeared in front of you, something that cameras couldn't see, something that your mind couldn't quite process, would you keep driving forward, or would you stop? Let me know in the comments below, because if you ever find yourself on the Dalton Highway, that decision might save your life. Story 5. Vanishing Lights of Nome. Have you ever wondered what happens to people who simply disappear in the middle of nowhere, leaving nothing behind but questions? Not answers, just endless, terrifying questions. Let me tell you something that will keep you awake tonight. This is not a legend. This is not fiction. This is what happened to me in Nome, Alaska, and I still do not understand why I survived when so many others did not. I moved to Nome 3 years ago for a job at the mining company. It seemed simple enough. Good pay, remote location. I needed a fresh start. The kind of place where nobody asks questions about your past. The kind of place where you can disappear into yourself. What I did not know was that in Nome, people disappear into something much worse. The first time I heard about the lights, I was sitting in the Polar Cafe drinking terrible coffee. The waitress, a woman named Sandra with tired eyes and deep lines around her mouth, mentioned them casually. Too casually. She said dozens of villagers had reported seeing glowing orbs drifting across the tundra at night. She said they moved with intention. Those were her exact words. Intention. As if something intelligent was controlling them. As if something was searching. I laughed it off. Local folklore. The kind of story people tell in remote places where the darkness lasts for months. Where isolation breeds paranoia and strange theories. But Sandra did not smile back. She refilled my coffee and said something I have never forgotten. They take people out there, she whispered. 3 times this year already. The lights come, and then people go missing. No bodies, no trace, just gone. I learned later that this was true. Since the beginning of the year, 7 people had vanished from Nome without explanation. A fisherman, a nurse, a teenage girl who was supposed to be home by midnight but never made it back. All of them vanished on nights when the lights had been reported. All of them gone into the darkness of the Alaska tundra. And none of them ever found. The locals called it the Vanishing Lights of Nome. They did not talk about it openly, but they talked about it in hushed voices in dark corners. Everyone had a theory. Most of them made no sense. Military experiments, alien phenomena, the creepy return of something ancient that lived beneath the ice. The terrifying truth was that nobody really knew anything. The uncertainty was the scariest part. That empty, chilling void where answers should be. I tried to ignore it. I went about my days. I worked at the mining site. I went back to my small rental house. I told myself that this was not my concern. These were not my people. I had come here to escape, not to solve mysteries. But the fear in this town was impossible to ignore. It hung in the air like cold breath. It made the sunsets feel darker. It made the nights feel haunted. October came, and with it came the permanent darkness. In Nome, the sun does not set for months in summer. And then in winter, it disappears almost entirely. The darkness is not like darkness anywhere else. It is total. It is suffocating. It is the kind of darkness that makes you understand why ancient people feared the night so deeply. It is a darkness where anything could exist. Anything could be watching you. I started noticing things. Strange things. Unsettling things. People would go out to get groceries and come back looking disturbed. They would not talk about what they had seen. Their eyes would be distant and frightened, like they had experienced something that their minds were struggling to process. I saw a man walk into the grocery store and his hands were shaking so badly that he could not hold his shopping basket. When the clerk asked him if he was okay, he just shook his head and left. He never came back to the store again. I heard later that he had moved south, just packed up and left everything behind. The scariest part was the atmosphere of denial. People did not want to acknowledge what was happening. It was easier to pretend that the missing people had simply left town, that they had gotten tired of the brutal cold and the creepy isolation and decided to move away. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. Something horrifying was happening in the darkness, something that did not follow the rules of normal reality. Then, in mid-October, I saw them myself. I had been working a late shift at the mining site. Around midnight, I drove home on the empty highway that cuts through the tundra. The road is long and straight and monotonous. There are no lights except your headlights. There are no buildings. There is nothing but frozen ground and darkness extending in every direction. It is one of the most isolating drives in North America. Most people do not feel comfortable doing it alone. I was about 15 minutes from my house when I first noticed the lights. At first, I thought they were distant car headlights, but something was wrong with them. They did not move like normal lights. They were drifting, floating, almost hovering above the tundra. They were glowing with a faint, sickly green color that I had never seen before. It was not natural. It was not any kind of light I could identify. It was unsettling and hypnotic and deeply, fundamentally wrong. There were 3 of them. They moved in unison, drifting from left to right, as if they were searching for something. Or someone. I felt my heart begin to beat faster. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. I told myself to stay calm, to keep driving, to reach my house. But the terrifying lights seemed to be getting closer. I pressed the accelerator. My car lurched forward faster, but the lights kept pace with me. They were moving parallel to the road now, staying about 100 yards away. The chilling glow reflected off the ice and snow, creating strange shadows that made the landscape look alien and hostile. I felt something dark crawling up my spine, a primal fear, the kind of fear that comes from seeing something that your brain cannot quite categorize, something that does not fit into your understanding of the world. Then, all at once, the lights stopped moving. They hung motionless above the tundra, about 50 yards from the road. The green glow intensified, becoming brighter and more intense. I could not look away. It was like the lights were pulling my attention toward them, drawing me deeper into something I did not understand. I thought about pulling over. I thought about walking toward them. The idea filled me with a horrifying sense of compulsion that I recognized was not my own desire. It was something external, something that wanted me to stop my car and step out into the freezing darkness. I forced myself to keep driving. I refused to stop. I refused to acknowledge the haunting pull that the lights seemed to exert. And then, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, the lights went dark. They simply disappeared. The glow faded, and the landscape returned to normal darkness and empty tundra. I did not stop driving until I reached my house. My hands were shaking. My shirt was soaked with sweat despite the freezing cold outside. I went inside and locked the doors. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the darkness and listened to every sound, every creak, every whisper of wind against the walls. By morning, I had convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing. Sleep deprivation, the monotony of the drive, the power of suggestion after hearing so many stories about the vanishing lights of Nome. My mind was playing tricks on me. But I knew that was a lie. I had seen something real, something terrifying. I started to become obsessed with the lights. I spent my evenings after work reading about unexplained phenomena in Alaska. I found old newspaper articles about strange occurrences in Nome dating back decades. In the 1950s, a group of miners reported seeing unusual glowing objects in the sky. In the 1970s, a researcher disappeared while investigating electromagnetic anomalies in the region. The scary pattern just kept repeating, over and over, different decades, different people, the same haunting outcome. I talked to an old man named Robert who ran the hardware store. He had lived in Nome for 40 years. He seemed like someone who might have answers. His face was weathered and lined with experience, but his eyes held something deeper. A knowledge that he did not want to share. A terrifying awareness of something dark. Robert told me that the lights were not new. They had been appearing for at least 100 years. Maybe longer. The indigenous people who lived in the area before European settlement had stories about them. Chilling stories. Stories about lights that came from beneath the earth. Stories about things that were not human. Stories about people who were taken by the lights and never returned. Or worse, people who came back changed. Wrong. People whose minds had been altered in ways that made them unrecognizable. There are 7 people missing, I said to Robert. This year alone. He nodded slowly. His expression was haunted and eerie, like he was remembering something awful. 7 that they found evidence of, he said. But how many disappeared before they could report it to anyone? How many people came out here and just vanished into the tundra? Nobody keeps records of that. Nobody wants to know. Robert also told me something else that made my blood run cold. He said that the lights were becoming more frequent. He said that in the past few years, they had been appearing more often. They were getting bolder, more active, more interested in the town. Like something was waking up, like something was becoming hungry. It feeds on the fear, Robert said. The more frightened we become, the stronger it gets. The stronger it gets, the more people disappear. It is a cycle. And it is getting worse. I dismissed this as the paranoid rambling of an old man who had spent too long in isolation. But I could not stop thinking about his words. I could not stop wondering if there was truth hidden somewhere beneath the creepy folklore and disturbing stories. The disappearances continued. In late October, a child went missing. A girl named Emma who was 8 years old. She had been playing near her house when her mother looked out the window and saw the horrifying green lights drifting across the nearby hillside. By the time the mother rushed outside, Emma was gone. They searched for days. Search and rescue teams combed the tundra with dogs and thermal imaging equipment. They found nothing. No trace. No body. The girl had simply vanished. The eerie silence that followed her disappearance was suffocating. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next tragedy. People stopped going outside after dark. Businesses closed earlier. The streets became empty and desolate. The atmosphere was suffocating. It felt like living in a nightmare where the rules of reality had shifted and nothing was safe anymore. Where darkness did not just mean the absence of light. It meant the presence of something else. Something hungry. Something that was hunting us. I considered leaving. I thought about packing my things and driving south like the frightened man at the grocery store. But something stopped me. Morbid curiosity. A disturbing fascination with the unknown. Or perhaps the same compulsion that had drawn me toward the lights on the highway. Something that wanted me to stay. Something that wanted me to understand what was happening in this terrifying, isolated corner of Alaska. Then came the night that changed everything. It was November 1st. I remember because I had been counting the days, counting down to when I thought the lights might become even more active. An old calendar in the community center had some notes written by someone, marking dates when disappearances had occurred. I noticed a pattern. The missing people had disappeared on specific dates. Dates that seemed to follow some kind of disturbing astronomical calendar. Dates related to celestial events, to the movement of the stars and planets, to something cosmic and deeply unsettling. I was obsessively checking my phone, watching local social media forums where people discussed the disappearances and shared their fears. That is when I saw a post from someone saying they had seen the lights again. This time they had been spotted near the abandoned television station on the outskirts of town. The old station had been defunct for years. It was a crumbling structure that nobody ever went near. It felt wrong. It had always felt wrong, even before the disappearances began. I made a decision that was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I decided to investigate. I decided to go to the old station and see if I could find any evidence of what was happening. Any clues about the nature of the lights. Any explanation for the terrifying pattern of disappearances. I packed a flashlight and my phone and drove out to the edge of town. The abandoned television station sat on a hillside overlooking the tundra. The building was old and weathered, covered in rust and peeling paint. The windows were broken. The doors hung open like the mouth of some dead thing. The entire place had an atmosphere of decay and abandonment. But underneath that was something else, a sense of presence, as if something was waiting inside, watching, hungry. I parked my car about 100 yards away and approached on foot. The cold was intense, the kind of cold that makes your lungs burn when you breathe. The kind of cold that drives all warmth and life out of the world. The snow crunched beneath my feet with each step, the sound echoing across the empty landscape. As I got closer to the building, I began to notice something disturbing. The snow around the station was disturbed. There were marks and impressions that did not look like normal animal tracks. They were too regular, too deliberate, like something had been walking in patterns, searching, pacing, and then something else caught my attention. A smell like burnt metal and sulfur mixed with something organic and rotten. The stench was absolutely horrifying. It made my stomach turn and my eyes water. I approached the main entrance and shone my flashlight inside. The interior was dark and filled with debris. Old radio equipment was scattered across the floor. Papers were strewn everywhere. It looked like it had been ransacked, or like something had been looking for something specific. On one wall, I saw scratches. Deep gouges in the concrete and metal, like something had clawed at the surface with tremendous force. The marks were too large to be human, too irregular, too disturbing. Then I saw something that made my heart nearly stop. Written on the wall in what appeared to be dried blood were names. 7 names, the names of the missing people. The names of those who had disappeared. Emma, Robert, Catherine, Michael, David, Lisa, Thomas, all 7 of them, listed there as if they were being marked, labeled, cataloged by something that was keeping a terrifying record. I was so focused on the names that I almost did not notice when the lights appeared. They came on suddenly, filling the interior of the building with that sickly green glow. 3 lights, just like before, but this time they were closer. Much closer. They were moving through the building with purpose and intention. They drifted between the old equipment and scattered debris, moving toward me. I felt that same compulsion I had felt on the highway, that same external pull, that same disturbing sense that something wanted me to stay, wanted me to let the lights reach me. But this time, I understood something that I had not understood before. I understood that if I let the lights touch me, I would never leave this place. I would join the names on the wall. I would become another missing person, another unsolved mystery, another tragedy that the town would whisper about in dark corners. I ran. I turned and ran back toward my car as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, I could hear the eerie sound of the lights. It was like a humming, a constant, pulsating sound that was not quite audible but that I could feel vibrating in my bones. It was the sound of something hungry, something ancient, something that had been waiting in the darkness of the Alaska tundra for a very long time. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the key into the ignition. The lights were getting closer. The green glow was filling my windshield. I could feel the presence of something vast and terrible and utterly inhuman. And then the engine turned over. My car roared to life. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and drove away from the station as fast as I could. The lights did not follow me this time. I watched them in my rearview mirror, hovering above the abandoned station. But I could feel their attention. I could feel them watching me as I drove away. I could feel them marking me, identifying me as a witness, as someone who had seen too much. When I reached my house, I immediately called the police. I told them everything. I told them about the names on the wall. I told them about the marks and the terrible smell and the lights that had pursued me through the building. The police responded with skepticism and confusion. They sent officers to investigate the station, but when they arrived, everything was clean. The names were gone. The scratches had disappeared. The smell had vanished. There was no evidence that anything unusual had ever happened there. The officers came to my house and asked if I had been drinking, if I was under stress, if I had a history of mental health issues. They did not believe me. They thought I had imagined it all or made it up for attention. But I knew what I had seen. I knew that I had discovered something. Something that the town was desperately trying to keep hidden. Something that the lights did not want to be exposed. And then I understood the most terrifying truth of all. The reason the police could not find evidence. The reason everything had been cleaned up and erased. The reason the investigation went nowhere. It was because someone in the town knew what was happening. Someone in a position of authority. Someone who was protecting the lights. Protecting whatever intelligence or force was behind the disappearances. Someone was keeping a terrifying secret. I became paranoid after that. I started wondering who it could be. Which officials were involved in the cover-up? Which people in the community knew about the vanishing lights of Nome and were complicit in the horrifying pattern of disappearances? Sandra at the cafe suddenly seemed suspicious. Robert at the hardware store. Even the police officers who had dismissed my account so easily. Everyone became a potential threat. Everyone became a potential collaborator in something dark and unspeakable. I realized I had to leave. I could not stay in a place where I could not trust anyone. A place where an ancient and unknowable intelligence was hunting under cover of darkness. A place where the authorities themselves might be involved in the horrifying disappearances. But here's the thing that terrifies me the most. The thing that keeps me awake at night even though I have been gone from Nome for over a year now. I started having dreams, vivid dreams. In these nightmarish dreams, I could see through the eyes of the lights. I could feel what they felt. I could sense their hunger and their purpose. And I could see something that I did not want to see. I could see that there was a pattern to the disappearances. A pattern that suggested intelligence. That suggested purpose. That suggested that something was building toward a specific goal. The 7 missing people. The 7 names on the wall. The number 7 seemed significant, important, ritualistic. And just last month, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from Nome. It described another disappearance. The 8th person, a name I did not recognize. A person I did not know. Someone new had joined the list. The cycle had continued even after I had left. But there was something else in the package. A photograph. It showed the 8 missing people standing together, standing in some kind of arranged formation. Standing in the darkness with the green lights visible in the background. They all looked confused, like they did not understand where they were or how they had gotten there. Like they were under some kind of influence or compulsion. But here's what made my blood freeze. Standing in the back of the photograph, barely visible in the shadows, was my face. My face was there in the photo, looking down at the 8 missing people, like I was standing there with them, like I was part of something, like somehow I was connected to the vanishing lights of Nome in a way I did not understand. I have never been back to Nome, but I know that I am still connected to those lights. I can feel them sometimes. In my dreams, in the quiet moments before sleep, in the darkness of my room at night, I can feel them watching me, waiting for me. The question that haunts me every single day is simple and terrifying. Are they still hunting me? Are they planning to bring me back to that freezing, isolated tundra where the vanishing lights of Nome drift endlessly across the darkness, searching and hungry and eternal? I do not have an answer. I only know fear. I only know that something in the far north is still out there. Still hunting. Still searching for the next person to take into the screaming darkness. So here's my question for you. If you started experiencing strange dreams about a place you had never been, if you started feeling watched by something you could not see, if you received a photograph showing yourself in a place you had never gone, what would you do? How would you know if you were still connected to something ancient and terrifying and utterly beyond human understanding? Write your answer in the comments below. Story 6. Iceworm Terror of the Matanuska Glacier. I died up there, in the ice, in Alaska. Not physically, but something in me stopped breathing the moment I heard the sound. Let me be clear about something before we go any further. I am not a believer in conspiracy theories. I don't to chase urban legends or spend my nights scrolling through paranormal forums. I am an ordinary man who worked as a surveyor for a mining company in Alaska, and I went to do my job. I went to the Matanuska Glacier, one of the most beautiful and terrifying places on Earth, and I encountered something that shattered every rational explanation I had ever built my life around. The question I need you to answer in the comments is this. If you heard something moving beneath your feet that shouldn't to exist, would you leave or would you investigate? The Matanuska Glacier sits about an hour northeast of Anchorage, a frozen wasteland that stretches for 27 miles across the landscape like a scar the planet refuses to heal. I had been hired to survey potential mining sites in the area. Good money, good benefits. And at 38 years old, I needed good money. My marriage had ended 2 years earlier, and I was trying to rebuild something that felt like stability. I arrived in mid-September when the creeping darkness of an Alaskan autumn was already beginning to swallow the daylight. The town nearest the glacier was nothing more than a collection of weathered buildings and people who had learned to accept the eerie cold and isolation as the price of living in this unforgiving territory. I checked into a motel that smelled like diesel fuel and ancient carpet. Through the window, I could see the distant white expanse of the glacier rising against the darkening sky. That first night, I couldn't sleep, not from excitement or nervousness, but from an unsettling feeling I couldn't quite name. It was as though something in the air itself was whispering a warning. I kept turning in bed, staring at shadows on the ceiling, listening to the wind scratch against the window pane like fingernails trying to get in. The next morning, I drove out to the glacier with my equipment packed carefully in the back of my truck. My supervisor, a man named Derek who had worked these sites for 15 years, had given me a specific area to survey. A section about 3 miles into the glacier that had shown some geological interest. Derek had mentioned something as I was leaving the office, something that I dismissed at the time but would later recognize as a chilling warning. People don't like going out there much anymore, he had said casually, not looking up from his computer screen. Not since the tremors started last year. And the smell. What smell? I had asked. You'll know it when you encounter it, he had replied, still not meeting my eyes. I thought he was joking. The kind of pranks experienced workers play on newcomers. Hazing disguised as concern. I was wrong. The moment I set foot on the glacier, I felt it. Not with my eyes or my ears, but with something deeper, something primal inside me. It was a bone-deep recognition of danger, the kind of ancient instinct that humans have tried to civilize out of themselves for thousands of years. The ice beneath my boots was ancient and hard, scarred with crevasses and strange formations. The sky above was a pale, unsettling blue, and the silence was so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. I worked for several hours, taking measurements, marking locations, collecting samples. The ice formations were fascinating, showing geological layers that told a story of thousands of years of accumulation and movement. But there was something else too, something that didn't fit the standard patterns of glacial structure. There were tunnels, smooth, almost perfectly cylindrical tunnels running through sections of the ice, some of them the size of drainage pipes, others massive enough to walk through if you were foolish enough to venture inside. I remember standing at the entrance of one of these tunnels around noon. The opening was ringed with a faint crystalline formation that was darker than the surrounding ice, almost iridescent in certain light. And there was a smell emanating from inside. Derek had been right about that. It was unlike anything I had encountered before, not entirely unpleasant, but deeply unsettling, a mixture of minerals and something organic, something ancient and heavy that caught in the back of my throat. As I stood there, examining the tunnel with my flashlight, I heard it. A low rumble, deep, rhythmic, not like thunder, not like an avalanche, but something purposeful, something alive. The ice beneath my feet vibrated with the frequency of it, and for a moment I froze, absolutely certain that I was standing on something, this back, and that it was shifting beneath me. I stepped away from the tunnel and swept my flashlight across the glacier, this surface. Everything appeared normal, but normal felt like a lie now. The rumble faded, but it didn't disappear completely. It just became quieter, as though something enormous was moving away from me, burrowing deeper into the ice. That is when the fear truly began. I told myself it was seismic activity. Glaciers shift, glaciers make noise. It is the nature of these massive frozen bodies. I knew this logically, rationally, in the part of my mind that held a degree in geology and had never encountered anything in nature that couldn't be explained by science. But another part of me, the part that was now screaming silently in the back of my consciousness, knew that explanation was insufficient. I continued my work, trying to maintain professional focus, but my hands were shaking. Every few minutes, I would pause and listen. Sometimes there was nothing. Other times, I would hear that same terrible rumble, always at a distance, always moving. Moving beneath the ice, moving through it, and once, I heard something that broke my mind open just a little bit. A sound like steam escaping, followed by that nauseating smell, stronger now, so thick I could almost taste it. I looked up to see a dark mist rising from a crevasse about 200 yards away. The mist was black and foul, and it rose straight up into the still air like a finger pointing at the sky. Around the opening, the ice glistened. It was wet, steaming, and the formation around it looked newly formed, as though something massive had just pushed through from below. I remembered Derek's words, the tremors, the strange smells, the appearance of steaming tunnels. And suddenly, without understanding why or how, I knew that I was on a glacier that harbored something that should not exist. Something that miners and workers had encountered before me. Something that had forced people to stop coming to this section of the Matanuska Glacier. The terrifying possibility began to crystallize in my mind as I stood there, watching the dark mist continue to rise. What if the stories the miners told, the ones that Derek had hinted at, were not exaggeration or folklore. What if there was something down there, beneath the ice? Something ancient and colossal and alive? The locals called it the iceworm terror. I had heard the name mentioned in bars and coffee shops in Anchorage, always as a joke, always followed by nervous laughter. But no one who had actually worked at the Matanuska Glacier was laughing when they spoke about it. Their faces changed. Their eyes went distant. They spoke in careful, measured tones about events they had witnessed but couldn't quite bring themselves to describe in detail. The miners told of a creature. Not a creature in the traditional sense, not something that anyone had ever clearly seen, but something whose presence was undeniable. Something that burrowed through the ice from below, creating tunnels and passages that appeared and disappeared without warning. A worm, a colossal, impossible worm that lived in the frozen darkness beneath the glacier's surface. The tremors increased in frequency throughout the afternoon. I had forgotten all about my survey by that point. I was simply standing on the ice, documenting the impossible, watching as more sections of the glacier began to steam and shift. The smell became so intense that I had to tie a cloth over my nose and mouth. It was like nothing nature was supposed to produce, like something ancient was being dragged up from the depths of the earth itself. I tried to leave several times. Each time, I would gather my equipment and begin walking back toward where I had parked my truck. Each time, the ground beneath me would shift in a way that made my direction unclear. The crevasses seemed to rearrange themselves. Sections of ice I thought I had crossed seemed to appear again in front of me. The Matanuska Glacier had become a maze, and I had become lost within it, hunted within it. By late afternoon, I understood what was happening. The creature was hurting me, pushing me deeper. I could feel its presence now. A massive weight moving beneath the ice, circling, interested, curious. The rumbles came closer. The steaming vents opened up around me. And once, just once, I saw it. Through a section of clear ice, I saw a shape. Not its head, not its tail, just a section of something enormous. Something scaled or segmented. Something that moved with purpose and intelligence beneath the frozen surface. It was the size of a highway, the width of a bus. The color was wrong, a sickly pallid white that had nothing to do with the ice surrounding it. It was moving, it was alive, and it was aware of me. I ran screaming across the glacier's surface, abandoning my equipment, abandoning any pretense of scientific rationality, running purely on the animal instinct to survive. Behind me, I could hear the ice cracking, breaking, fracturing. The creature was accelerating, moving toward the surface, coming after me. Do you know how I found my truck? Somehow, through sheer desperate luck, I stumbled onto the parking area. I threw myself into the driver's seat and started the engine. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror to see the glacier itself convulsing, shifting, the ice rising in an impossible wave as something beyond comprehension pushed toward the surface. I have never told anyone the full truth about what I saw up there. Not my supervisor, not the police, not anyone. I have built a new life far from Alaska, in a place where the ground is solid and the sky is always visible. But I know what I encountered. I know what lives beneath that glacier. I know that something ancient and terrifying and utterly beyond human understanding makes its home in the Matanuska Glacier. And that every so often, that creature stirs, and the miners feel the tremors, and they see the steaming vents, and they leave. Because once you have looked into the eye of something that has no place in our understanding of what is possible, once you have felt that gaze turn toward you with interest and hunger, you never quite come back. I left Alaska, but I haven't escaped it. Not really. Some nights, I wake up in cold sweat, certain that I can hear that terrible rumbling sound, that I can smell that ancient, suffocating stench. And I understand something that haunts me more than any monster ever could. That creature is still down there, in the ice, in the darkness beneath the Matanuska Glacier. It's still moving, still burrowing, still existing in that frozen, unsettling territory between the known world and the impossible. And every day, the climate grows warmer. Every year, the glacier melts a little more. And that terrifying realization leads me to my final question for you. What happens when the ice is gone and there is nothing left to contain what lives beneath it? Tell me in the comments. I want to know that I'm not the only one who lies awake at night, wondering about this. Story 7. Hunger That Waits. Have you ever heard something in the wilderness that made your blood freeze? something that sounded almost human but not quite, like a voice that had forgotten how to be a person. I have. And what I found in the Brooks Range of Alaska changed everything I thought I knew about fear. My name is Marcus, and I used to be a wildlife photographer. Used to be, because after what happened last October, I can't bring myself to enter the wilderness anymore. I can't even look at photographs of forests without my hands starting to shake. But I need to tell this story. I need someone else to know what is waiting up there in those frozen mountains, hidden in the darkness where no one should ever go. It started as a simple assignment. A nature magazine wanted shots of the Brooks Range during early winter, the kind of stark, beautiful images that make people feel connected to the raw power of Alaska. I've been shooting in remote locations for 15 years. I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. I was wrong. I was so terribly, horrifyingly wrong. The first 3 days went perfectly. Clear skies, incredible light, and the kind of silence that only exists in places where civilization is just a distant memory. I was camped near a hunter's trail, an old route that trappers had used decades ago before the area became too remote, too dangerous, too forgotten. On the fourth morning, I met two local hunters, brothers named Jack and Tom, who had grown up in Fairbanks. They were tracking caribou, but something in their eyes told me they found something else entirely. Jack wouldn't look directly at me when he spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, like he was afraid something might hear us even out there in the open. He told me they discovered a cave 2 miles north, hidden in a rocky outcrop that shouldn't have been there according to their maps. The entrance was narrow, he said, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. But it was what they found inside that made them leave their gear and run. Bones, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, arranged in patterns that weren't too natural, weren't too random. And the walls, Tom added, his hands trembling as he rolled a cigarette. The walls were covered in drawings. Ancient petroglyphs that showed figures, tall and impossibly thin, with antlers sprouting from elongated skulls. The figures were always bent over smaller shapes that looked disturbingly human. I should have listened to the fear in their voices. I should have packed my equipment and headed back to Fairbanks that same day. But curiosity is a terrible thing. It whispers in your mind, promising answers, promising that one perfect shot that will define your career. So I asked them to take me there. Jack refused immediately, but Tom, after a long pause and another cigarette, agreed to show me the location. He wouldn't go inside again, he said. Nothing could make him go back in there. But he'd point me in the right direction. The hike took 3 hours through terrain that grew increasingly unsettling. The trees were wrong, bent at odd angles like they were trying to grow away from something. No birds sang. No squirrels chattered in the branches. The silence was absolute and suffocating, pressing against my eardrums until I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my chest. Tom stopped at a ridge overlooking a shallow valley, pointed to a dark slash in the rocks below, and then turned around without another word. I watched him walk away, moving faster with each step, and then I was alone. The cave entrance was exactly as they described it. A narrow vertical crack in the stone, barely visible unless you knew where to look. The opening was dark, so dark it seemed to absorb the daylight around it. I pulled out my flashlight, checked my camera, and squeezed through the gap. The smell hit me immediately. Decay, thick and sweet and wrong, like rotting meat mixed with something else, something chemical and ancient that made my stomach twist. But underneath that was warmth. The air inside the cave was hot, almost tropical, completely impossible for October in Alaska. The main chamber opened up after about 20 feet of narrow passage. My flashlight beam swept across the space, and I felt my legs go weak. Bones everywhere, stacked against the walls in careful arrangements, piled in corners, laid out in circular patterns on the floor. Most were caribou and moose, their massive skulls grinning in the darkness. But mixed among them were others, smaller ones, the kind I didn't want to identify but couldn't help recognizing. Human femurs, human ribs, human skulls with the tops cracked open. The petroglyphs covered every surface, not just drawings but elaborate scenes carved deep into the stone. The emaciated figures appeared over and over, their bodies stretched and wrong, their antlers branching into impossible patterns. In every image, they were feeding, mouths open impossibly wide, hands with too many fingers reaching for the smaller human shapes beneath them. And in one panel, near the back of the chamber, was a scene that made my blood run cold. The figures were dancing around something that looked like a doorway, and through that doorway were more figures, hundreds of them, waiting in a darkness that the artist had somehow made seem deeper than the stone around it. That's when I heard the voice, soft at first, almost lost in the sound of my own breathing. A whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls themselves and from inside my own skull. It said one word, over and over, in a tone that was desperate and hungry and wrong. Food, food, food. The voice was cracked and rasping, like someone who hadn't spoken in centuries, like vocal cords that had dried out and split and been forced to work anyway. Food, please, food. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam swinging wildly across the bones and the petroglyphs and the darkness that pressed in from the deeper tunnels at the back of the chamber. My rational mind tried to explain it away. Wind through the rock, acoustic tricks, my own fear creating sounds that weren't really there. But then I saw something move in that deeper darkness. A shape, tall and thin, that didn't quite match the shadows around it. And the smell of decay grew stronger, so strong I could taste it, feel it coating the inside of my mouth. I ran. I don't remember making the decision. My body just moved, driven by an instinct older than thought, older than civilization. I squeezed through the narrow entrance, scraping my jacket against the stone, and burst out into the daylight. The cold air hit my lungs like a punch, and I kept running, crashing through the brush, not caring about the noise or the direction, just needing to put distance between myself and that horrifying cave. When I finally stopped, my lungs burning and my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst, I realized I dropped my camera. My expensive professional camera was still in that cave, probably lying on the floor next to those carefully arranged bones. And something inside me, that same terrible curiosity that had gotten me into this mess, whispered that I should go back for it, that I needed those photographs, that this was the story of a lifetime. I made it about 50 feet back toward the cave before I heard the voice again. But this time it wasn't whispering. It was calling, loud and clear and terrible, using words I shouldn't have understood but did. The voice was speaking in hunger, in pure need that had burned for so long it had become something else, something aware and patient and evil. It wasn't asking for food anymore. It was promising food. It was telling me about the taste of warm flesh and the satisfaction of a belly finally full after endless, aching centuries of emptiness. I turned and ran again, this time not stopping until I reached my camp. I packed everything in under 10 minutes, not caring about order or care, just shoving gear into bags with shaking hands. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in blood red and deep purple, and in that dying light I saw something on the ridge above me. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, with a crown of branches or antlers that caught the last rays of daylight. It stood perfectly still, watching me, and even from that distance I could feel its hunger, could feel it evaluating me, deciding if I was worth the chase. I didn't wait to find out. I hiked through the night, using my headlamp and pure terror to fuel my legs. Every sound made me spin around. Every shadow looked like it might be that gaunt figure, those reaching fingers, that endless hunger given form. By dawn I reached the main trail, and by noon I was at the ranger station, babbling my story to a confused park officer who clearly thought I was suffering from hypothermia or altitude sickness. They sent a team to investigate 3 days later. They found the cave, they found the bones, the petroglyphs, everything exactly as I described. My camera was there too, sitting in the center of that circular bone arrangement, its lens cracked. But when they reviewed the memory card, all the photos I'd taken were corrupted. Just static and distorted shapes that might have been the cave walls or might have been something else. Something with too many limbs and a hunger that could burn through digital film. The cave was sealed after that. The official report called it a protected archaeological site, but they heard rumors. Stories from other hikers who got too close. Tales of voices on the wind, begging for food in that same cracked, desperate tone. Sightings of impossibly tall figures moving through the forest at dusk, their antlers casting shadows that don't match the light. And disappearances. 3 people in the last 4 months, all experienced outdoorsmen, all vanished without a trace in the same area where that cave sits hidden beneath tons of government concrete. But here, it's the thing that keeps me awake at night, the detail that makes me check my locks 3 times before bed even though I live in downtown Anchorage now, surrounded by people and lights and civilization. The night before I left Alaska for good, I was packing up my apartment when I heard it. That voice, soft and distant but unmistakable, coming from somewhere outside my window. Food, it whispered. I know you. I remember your taste on the air. I'm still hungry. And impatient. I've waited centuries. I can wait a little longer. I moved to Seattle 2 days later. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I hear that voice again. And I wonder if the cave was ever really the source, or if it was just a doorway, just one entrance to something that has always been here, always been hungry, always been waiting in the darkness for someone to listen to its call. So here, it's my question for you. If you heard that voice, calling to you from the darkness, begging for food in a tone that made your blood freeze, would you run? Or would some part of you, that curious, terrible part that makes us human, want to know what is really waiting there in the shadows? Write your answer in the comments, because I need to know if I'm the only one who still hears it calling, or if that hunger has found others, waiting for its moment to feed again. Story 8, Thing in the Ice. Have you ever wondered what happens when something that was meant to stay buried forever finally breaks free? I used to laugh at people who believed in monsters. I was a field researcher for the Alaska Department of Natural Resources, someone who dealt in facts, measurements, and scientific data. My job was simple: document environmental changes in the Portage Valley region, track glacial recession, catalog findings. Nothing about my work prepared me for what I found in the ice that March, or for what found me afterward. The winter had been unusually warm, the kind of warm that makes lifelong Alaskans nervous. Glaciers that had stood for thousands of years were retreating at disturbing speeds, revealing things that should have remained hidden. I was alone that day, taking core samples near the eastern ridge of Portage Glacier, when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bear, a dark mass suspended in the blue-white ice, maybe 15 feet down. But as I cleared away the surface frost and peered closer, my blood turned cold. The shape was wrong, too tall, too broad in the shoulders. And then I saw the hand. It was massive, easily twice the size of my own, with long fingers that ended in what looked like blackened nails or claws. The arm was covered in coarse, dark hair, matted and frozen in twisted patterns. I followed the arm up to a shoulder, then to what I can only describe as a face that belonged in nightmares. The features were almost human. Almost. The brow was too heavy, the jaw too pronounced. The nose was flat and wide. But the eyes, even frozen and clouded with ice, seemed to stare directly at me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. This was no bear. This was something that walked upright, something that might have once hunted in these very mountains. I should have reported it immediately. That was protocol. But I made a choice that haunts me every single night. I wanted the discovery for myself, the academic glory, the research opportunities, the chance to prove that something impossible was real. I called in a private extraction team, people I knew who asked fewer questions than they should have. It took 3 days to cut it free from the ice. The thing stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered head to toe in dark reddish-brown hair. The smell when we finally freed it was horrifying, a mixture of decay and something else, something animal and ancient that made my eyes water. We wrapped it in thermal blankets and loaded it into a refrigerated trailer. I drove that trailer myself, alone, through the dark Alaska night to a private research facility outside Anchorage. The university scientists I contacted were skeptical until I showed them the photographs. Within hours, they had assembled a team. They promised discretion. They promised me credit for the find. What they didn't, the promise was safety. We kept the creature in a specialized freezer unit while we conducted initial examinations. The DNA tests came back confused, showing markers that didn't match any known primate species. The bone density was incredible. The muscle structure suggested strength that would make a grizzly bear look weak. But the most disturbing discovery was in the brain cavity. It was large, far larger than it should have been for any ape. Whatever this thing was, it had been intelligent. I stayed late at the facility that first week, obsessed with documenting every detail. The other researchers went home to their families, but I remained, taking measurements, photographs, tissue samples. On the 7th night, the power failed. The backup generators kicked in immediately, but in that brief moment of darkness, I heard something that made my heart stop. A crack, sharp and loud, like a frozen tree branch snapping in winter cold. It came from the freezer unit. I told myself it was just the metal contracting, just the ice shifting. I was wrong. The thing began to thaw. Slowly at first, then faster than should have been possible. The freezer, its temperature logs showed no malfunction. Yet the ice encasing the creature was melting, pooling on the floor in dark puddles that reflected the emergency lighting like oil. Within 2 days, the ice was completely gone. That is when things started happening in Portage Valley.
The truth is, that humiliating moment at the table didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the final straw on a pile I'd been quietly carrying for years. And if I'm honest, I was the one who built that pile, piece by piece, every time I told myself to be patient, be understanding, or don't make waves. I was the one who opened my door when my son and his young wife needed a place to stay, just for a few months. I was the one who insisted the extra room could be theirs, that I didn't mind rearranging my life, that a house was meant to be lived in by family. I even painted their room myself, a soft green shade my son liked as a child. The first morning they lived with me, I woke up eager, almost excited. I made breakfast, eggs, toast, fruit on the side, and placed it on the table as they walked in. My son hugged me. Avery nodded politely, thanking me without looking up from her phone. That should have been my first warning. I told myself she was just shy, or overwhelmed, or adjusting. I told myself a lot of things. Weeks passed, then months. My house began to shift, not in structure, but in atmosphere. I'd come home from the store and find Avery rearranging the living room, posting pictures with captions like, making our space cozy. Our space. My furniture. My grandmother's quilt draped across the couch like a prop she wasn't sentimental enough to fold gently. When I mentioned it once, she smiled like I was joking and said, "Oh, I didn't think you minded." And I didn't say I minded because I didn't want to be the controlling mother-in-law everyone jokes about. It was small things at first. My favorite mug disappearing, my laundry being moved from the dryer to the floor, lights left on, doors left open, a general sense that my routines were inconvenient in my own home. One evening, I overheard Avery say to her friend on the phone, "Linda's sweet but intense. She hovers, that word sat heavy on my chest. I wasn't hovering, I was trying to share space. There's a difference. But when I confronted my son gently, "Hey, sweetheart, is everything okay?" Avery seems uncomfortable with me, he just sighed and said I was reading too much into things. He always said that. Even when he was a kid and didn't want to talk about something, he'd hide behind that phrase. Eventually, it became normal for them to take over the kitchen every evening for their elaborate meals, filling the counters with ingredients I never touched. I'd squeeze myself between them just to wash a dish. Sometimes I'd hear Avery whisper to him, "Your mom doesn't need to be involved in everything." Everything? I lived there. I paid the bills. I kept that roof standing. Yet each time I felt myself shrinking back, telling myself it was temporary, that they'd move out soon, that this was what support looked like, that mothers made sacrifices. I'd spent my whole life making sacrifices. It felt natural to slip back into that role, even when it hurt.
I'm writing this now because I need people to know what is out there. The sightings in Portage Valley aren't T-stopping. They re-spreading. People in Anchorage are starting to report the same thing now. Figures watching from the darkness. Shapes moving through the trees with purpose and intelligence. And every single witness describes the same chilling detail. The way the creatures watch them, like they re-studying human behavior, learning our patterns, our weaknesses. The glaciers are still melting. Every day, more ice disappears. Every day, more ancient secrets are revealed. And I can't stop wondering what else is trapped in that frozen darkness, waiting for the warmth to set it free. Tonight, I'm leaving Alaska. I don't know where I'll go or if distance will even matter. Because the thing in the ice knows my face now. It knows where I live, where I work, how I found it. And I have the terrible feeling that it wants something from me. Revenge, maybe. Or something worse. The scariest part, I said, what I saw in the ice or what I see watching me now. The scariest part is knowing that I'm the one who released it. I am the one who pulled it from its frozen prison and brought it into our world. And now that it is awake, I don't think it is ever going back to sleep. So here is my question for you. If something has been buried and frozen for thousands of years, kept away from our world by ice and time and darkness, should we ever disturb it? Should we ever dig up what was meant to stay hidden forever? Write your answer in the comments below, because I am terrified I already know mine. Story 9. Whiteout Phantom. A terrifying true confession. I've never told anyone this story. Not the search and rescue teams. Not the authorities. Not even my wife, sitting in the kitchen right now, completely unaware of what I witnessed on Denali's slopes. But tonight, I'm telling you everything. Because the thing I saw up there on that mountain, the haunting, chilling presence that changed me forever, it is still out there. And I need someone to know what. It's real. It was May of last year when I decided to summit Denali. I was 48 years old, in the best shape of my life, and desperate to prove something to myself. A midlife crisis disguised as an adventure. I'd trained for months. I'd done Rainier. I'd done McKinley, his cousin mountains. But Denali was different. Denali was the ultimate goal. I knew the danger was real, but I felt invincible. That feeling, that cocky certainty, is what almost killed me. I arrived at base camp on the West Buttress Road with 14 other climbers. The team was solid. Experienced guides, serious athletes, people who understood the terrifying and unpredictable nature of climbing on Denali's slopes. Our lead guide, Marcus, was a legend. He summited 63 times. 63 times he faced the horrifying conditions, the whiteout storms, the sudden temperature drops that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. I felt safe with him. That safety, I would learn, was an illusion. For the first 10 days, everything went perfectly. We acclimatized. We moved up the mountain. The weather was surprisingly cooperative for Denali. Almost suspiciously so. We decamp, sleep, wake in the eerie silence of the high altitude, and push higher. The air grew thinner. My lungs burned, but my spirit soared. I was going to make it. I was going to stand at 20,384 feet and feel alive in a way I never felt before. Then came the unsettling feeling I couldn't shake. Around 17,000 feet, something changed. It wasn't too dramatic at first. Just a lingering, creeping unease that followed me from camp to camp. The other climbers seemed normal, focused, determined, but I couldn't ignore the disturbing sensation crawling up my spine every time the sun dipped low on the horizon. The shadows on the snow seemed to stretch too far. The wind sounded different, less like natural weather patterns and more like something was whispering beneath the roar. Marcus noticed my distraction during one of our rest days. I told him I was feeling the altitude, the isolation, the weight of the mountain pressing down. He nodded with understanding. He'd seen plenty of climbers struggle with the psychological toll. But what he said next sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with Denali. It was brutal cold. "Stay close to the group up here," Marcus said. "People get strange ideas at this elevation. The mind plays tricks. The darkness, the silence, the sense that you are so far from anything familiar. It warps your thinking. But there's something else too." I asked him what he meant. He hesitated. A man who summited Denali 63 times actually hesitated before speaking about climbing conditions. Finally, he told me about the sightings. Over his decades on this mountain, Marcus had heard reports from other guides, other climbers, people he trusted completely. They spoke of a figure, an impossible figure, a presence that appeared in the whiteout storms near the summit push. An eerie, ice-encrusted form that moved against the wind itself. A shape that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist, that walked through conditions that should obliterate any living thing. Marcus called it the Whiteout Phantom. He described it as a chilling apparition that never approached, never threatened directly. But every single climber who reported seeing it, every person who witnessed this terrifying and nightmarish presence in the swirling white, experienced something catastrophic immediately after. Not everyone died, but something changed. The temperature would plummet suddenly, dropping 15, sometimes 20 degrees in minutes. Frostbite developed faster. Decisions became muddled. People descended. People got injured. People disappeared. I asked Marcus if he'd ever seen it himself. His face went pale. He looked away toward the white slopes stretching endlessly before us. And I knew. He had seen it, and he wasn't going to talk about it. We pushed toward the summit 4 days later. The weather window was closing. Marcus decided we'd make the final assault on what some call the most dangerous mountain in North America. The forecast showed clear skies. It was a false forecast. It had to be. We left camp at 1 in the morning, Headlamps cutting through the darkness, ropes connecting us in a line. Myself, Marcus, and 4 other climbers from our group. The air was so cold it burned when I breathed, a horrifying and disturbing sensation that never stopped feeling wrong. 18,000 feet, 19,000 feet. The oxygen was so thin that every movement felt dreamlike and nightmarish, disconnected from reality. Then the wind changed. It came from nowhere, a sudden screaming surge of white that swallowed us completely. Whiteout conditions that formed so fast I couldn't see more than 3 feet in any direction. My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. The forecast had said clear skies, but forecasts mean nothing on Denali. Is slopes. Nature doesn't care about predictions. Marcus called out through the radio that we depause, rope up tighter, wait for the conditions to pass. We huddled against the ridge, pressing ourselves into the mountain, trying to present as small a target as possible to the screaming, terrifying wind. That is when I saw it, a shape in the white. At first, I thought it was another climber who lost sight of the group. But it was too tall, too elongated, moving in a way that no human could move while wearing bulky cold weather gear. It was walking up the mountain, against the wind, walking through a whiteout so severe that I could barely see my own gloved hands in front of my face. And this figure was moving through it like it was walking through a summer breeze. The shape was encrusted, completely covered in ice and frost. White upon white, but I could make out a kind of humanoid form, a silhouette that registered in my brain as wrong, impossible, and terrifyingly present. It was moving with purpose, moving with intent, moving like it was searching for something, or someone. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was frozen, paralyzed by a fear so profound and unsettling that my brain couldn't process what my eyes were witnessing. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a hallucination from altitude sickness or oxygen deprivation. This was something real, something here on Denali. It was slopes with us. The eerie, ice-covered figure turned its head toward our group. I swear I felt it look at me. I swear I felt its attention settle on my face like a weight pressing down, a terrifying and chilling pressure that made my blood freeze in my veins. Then the temperature dropped. It fell so fast that my instruments couldn't even track it properly. 45 degrees below zero became 60 below. 60 became 70. The wind didn't just increase. It became something conscious, something malevolent, something that wanted us dead. Frostbite developed on Marcus, his cheek in seconds. One of the other climbers started screaming that his hands were going numb, that the pain was unbearable. And the figure was still there, still watching, still moving through the disturbing whiteout like it was the most natural thing in the world. Marcus was yelling something into the radio, something about emergency descent, about moving now. The rope connecting us jerked suddenly. Someone was rappelling, trying to get down, trying to escape. I turned away from the white-clad shape, forced myself to move, forced my oxygen-starved body to respond to the terrifying emergency unfolding around me. The descent was nightmarish. I don't remember most of it. Muscle memory took over. Rope work, careful footing, moving down a mountain I could barely see through a storm that seemed to have a consciousness of its own. My mind kept returning to that figure, that impossible shape, that chilling apparition that walked against the wind itself. We made it to the next camp with 2 climbers suffering from severe frostbite. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. One of the other climbers, a woman named Sarah, kept asking me if I saw it too. If I saw the thing in the white. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because speaking about it felt like it would make it more real. We descended in stages over the next 3 days. By the time we reached base camp, the altitude sickness was fading, and the terrifying events on the mountain started to feel almost dreamlike. Almost unreal, but I knew what I'd seen. I knew I'd witnessed something that defied explanation, something horrifying and eerie that existed on Denali, its slopes in defiance of everything we know about nature and physics. The guides kept the sightings quiet. No official reports, no documentation, just a quiet understanding between Marcus and those of us who made that final push. We'd seen something we weren't supposed to see. Something that didn't fit into the normal categories of mountain danger. Something that demanded silence. But I can't stay silent anymore, because I think I finally understand what it was. And the realization terrifies me more than the actual sighting did. I've done research. I've read climbing journals going back decades. I've studied historical accounts of Denali's slopes, and the whiteout phantom appears in them. Not often, not regularly, but consistently. In 1967, a climber reported seeing an ice-covered figure in a whiteout near the summit. 4 other climbers in his group developed severe frostbite despite modern protective gear. 2 of them lost fingers. In 1983, a guide named Robert Patterson documented seeing a humanoid shape walking through conditions that should have killed anything alive. His entire team descended. 2 climbers didn't. He survived the descent, not from the cold, but from sudden altitude sickness that developed within an hour of the sighting. In 2001, a climbing blogger described an eerie, frost-encrusted presence in the upper camps. She used exactly the words I would have used. It never approached, it never threatened directly, but its presence meant danger. After her post, 7 climbers were evacuated from Denali that season. 3 died. The pattern is undeniable. The sightings correlate directly with deadly temperature drops, with sudden onset of severe frostbite, with climbers developing mysterious conditions that shouldn't exist at that elevation. What if the whiteout phantom isn't supernatural horror? What if it is something worse? What if it is a climber, someone who died on Denali years ago, someone whose body was never found, never recovered, preserved perfectly in the eternal ice and cold? A body that somehow still moves, still walks, still exerts influence over the mountain around it. A presence frozen in time but not in motion. I think about the disappearances. The climbers who vanished on Denali over the decades. Bodies occasionally found decades later, perfectly preserved by the cold, still wearing their gear, their faces turned toward the summit as if they were still trying to reach the top even in death. What if one of them didn't stay down? What if one of them keeps walking? An eerie and terrifying echo of ambition, of the determination to summit no matter the cost. Manifest as an impossible figure that appears in the whiteout to remind other climbers that the mountain always wins, that the cold and altitude and darkness and isolation always take what they want, that no human ambition can overcome Denali, this cruel and uncaring nature. I am not going back to that mountain. I'll never attempt another summit, and I find myself avoiding anything that reminds me of that experience. The cold, the darkness, the isolation, the sound of wind that seems almost conscious, almost aware. But I know the phantom is still there, still walking against the wind on Denali's slopes, still waiting for the next group of climbers brave enough or foolish enough to push toward the summit, still heralding the terrifying temperature drops and deadly conditions that follow in its wake. The mountain will keep its secrets. It always does. But I needed to tell you this. I needed someone to know that there are things on this earth that don't have explanations. Things that exist in the thin air of the highest peaks. Things that blur the line between the natural and the unsettling, between the possible and the horrifying. Before I go, I have to ask you something. The thing I saw on that mountain, the ice-covered figure walking through the impossible whiteout, I've never been able to prove it existed. Sometimes I doubt my own memory, wondering if it was altitude hallucination or oxygen deprivation. But deep down, I know what I witnessed was real. So tell me, if you saw something terrifying and unexplainable while climbing a mountain, something that nobody would believe, something that defied every rational explanation, would you speak up? Or would you stay silent, like I did, like all the other climbers have, letting the chilling truth stay buried in the ice and cold? Write your answer in the comments below. Let me know you heard this story. Let me know I am not alone in knowing the whiteout phantom walks Denali's slopes. Stay safe out there. And if you ever find yourself climbing at altitude, remember, the mountain is always watching. And sometimes, it watches back. And so the whisper fades into the wind. Alaska keeps its secrets under ice. But sometimes, for a moment, it lets us peek inside. If you haven't already, subscribe and tap that bell. More true stories and legends wait in the dark. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from or if you felt the chill of something unexplainable yourself. Share it in the comments. Midnight Whispers isn't just a channel, it's a campfire across the miles, burning in the endless night. Until next time, stay warm and keep your lights low.